Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, and today is April 21st, 2018. Okay, so we'll be continuing now with the examination of the Anguttara Nikaya. This is the book of numerical discourses, and we are now in the book of twos. Okay, so now we're at sutta number 32. And so in this sutta, the Buddha says that I will teach you the plane, I think this is the word bhumi, of the bad person and the plane of the good person. Yeah, and often these words, especially the word good person, is used almost synonymously with the word noble person, but maybe not necessarily in the technical sense of those who have reached the stages from stream entry up to the higher stages, but probably here it's just intended in a general sense of how one distinguishes a bad person from a good person. Okay, and so we can call these maybe the criteria for a bad person and the criterion for a good person. So the criterion for the bad person is that a bad person is ungrateful and unthankful. Actually, the three factors are mentioned here. The bad person is ungrateful and unthankful. And the Pali words that are rendered here, ungrateful and unthankful. Well, let's take the positive forms of the words. Okay, so the word that would be represented as gratitude would be katanyu, and the word that's translated as thankful is kattavedi. Okay, what's common to both words is the past participle katta, which means done. What has been done. And then katanyu is based on the root nya. I always am losing the formatting for the characters. Nya, which means to know. And kattavedi has the same initial participle, katta, what has been done, and it's based on the verb. The root is vid, which also means to know. So in both cases, it's knowing what has been done. So specifically what it's indicating is knowing, being aware of favors or good deeds or benefits done to oneself. And so under each of these major headings, the bad person and the good person, we'll see that three factors are mentioned. First is the bad person is ungrateful and unthankful. And then it's said, a kind of generalization is made that ingratitude and unthankfulness are extolled by the bad. So bad people extol lack of gratitude, lack of thankfulness. And then the third part of the statement is that this is again making a generalization, that ingratitude and unthankfulness belong entirely to the plane of the bad person. So you could say that ingratitude and unthankfulness are the characteristics of bad people. And so one criterion for determining who is a bad person, or maybe better, what is the essential characteristics that make a person, quote, a bad person, that is ingratitude and unthankfulness. And then the contrast to that, the opposite, is the plane of the good person. And here too we have sort of three subordinate factors mentioned under this heading. That's the good person is one who is grateful and thankful. And then the second part is that gratitude and thankfulness are extolled by the good. So good people are not only themselves grateful and thankful, but also good people praise and encourage gratitude and thankfulness. And then gratitude and thankfulness belong, you could say, belong entirely to the plane of the good person. Maybe you could say that they belong entirely to the plane of the good person for the two reasons that good people are grateful and thankful, and good people also praise gratitude and thankfulness. Okay, and so this statement, you could say, encourages us to try to look into ourselves and to see, under certain conditions, are we being without gratitude and without thankfulness, and then to reflect further and then try to see what are the reasons to be grateful and thankful. Because there are so many things that we just take for granted, benefits that come to us, and we're likely just to sort of take them for granted and not realize that these benefits that come to us through the labor, the dedication, the service of many other people. Just to take example here, like I come here, all I have to do is bring my computer, set it up, and then every week Johnny and Sandy come and they set up the equipment, plug everything in, get the machine going. So the whole class can see the text that we're expounding on the screen, and people on the internet can see the recordings of the class. Actually, it's also being live streamed, so people can watch it live streamed. Then it will get recorded. Then I think the recording goes over to Jason. Or you put it up directly?
I put it up on YouTube.
So Johnny puts it up on YouTube. And then I sit here, and then I always find that there's a flask of tea waiting for me. And then every day at 10 to 7 in the morning, at 11:20 later in the morning, we hear a bell ring, and we just get up and we go to the dining hall, and then there's trays put out with very delicious food, and so we're likely to take that for granted. We just assume it's part of just as the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, so at 10 to 7 and 11:20, the bell is going to ring and food will be put out on the table. But we have to realize that there are people who order the food. The food is grown by farmers all over the world. Both things are imported from Asia. The food gets shipped up to the monastery. There's the cook and sometimes volunteer cooks who prepare the food, put it out nicely in the trays. And so we just walk up there and we find the food just like, as though it just sort of magically appears out of thin air. And even the clothes that we wear. And this is something that we should deeply reflect on, that these clothes, often they're produced by laborers who are working in countries like Bangladesh, China, Vietnam, Cambodia, working under very dangerous conditions. This is part of our unfortunate global capitalist system. Under very dangerous conditions, unregulated factories working for very low wages to manufacture the clothes that we wear, and we're able to get them at a cheap price. And so, on the one hand, we should be grateful and thankful for all of the labor that goes into the production of these clothes, but also we should remember with a sense of maybe compassion and concern for the well-being of the workers who labor, putting sometimes their health and well-being at risk just to produce those clothes. And also the electronic equipment that we use. Again, we take it for granted, but there are laborers working in underdeveloped countries and these factories, sometimes working 10, 12 hours a day, doing these boring, repetitive tasks of just putting a particular a chip into a particular place or soldering a particular connection. And that is how these goods come to us. Then my own teacher in Sri Lanka, the German monk Venerable Nyanaponika, he used to do in his last years, every day he used to do a meditation on gratitude, sort of going back and thinking about first his parents back in Germany who brought him up with apparently very loving parents, and he would think about them with gratitude. Then he thought about all of the people his teachers when he was a young student. Then he would think about the conditions that enabled him, because he was from a Jewish family in Germany, and he was able to escape from Germany before Hitler began the mass extermination of Jewish people. He was able to escape himself and also to bring his mother out from Germany. And he brought her first to Austria in 1936. But then when Austria fell to the Nazis in 1938, then he brought his mother to Sri Lanka, his mother and other relatives. And the other relatives went on to Australia, but his mother stayed in Sri Lanka, and there was a well-to-do Sri Lankan family who provided accommodation to his mother, and then she continued to live there for the rest of her life. And she, even though she came from a traditional Jewish background, but under the influence of her son, she became a Buddhist as well. And then he would think, Venerable Nyanaponika, he would think about his own monastic teacher, that was the first German Buddhist monk, Venerable Nyanatilloka, and then about his early Dharma friends in the monastic life. There were two Sri Lankan monks, Venerable Soma, Venerable Keminda. And then I think he used to think about the young American monk who is looking after him in his last years. Okay, so in this way, through reflection on how the various items of daily use, reflection on the processes by which they come to us, and the vast networks of people that are responsible for producing them, manufacturing them, gathering them, collecting them, shipping them, providing them to us, as well as thinking of the people who provide us with, apart from material support, the people who provide us with education, with Dharma teachings. It's not a hint in any way. Then we can develop a sense of gratitude and thankfulness. And even extending it beyond the human realm, we could think of, the processes of pollination that produce the fruits, the vegetables, the nuts that we eat, and this whole sort of very intricate web of life that makes everything possible, that makes possible the flourishing of humanity. Then we could also extend our gratitude and thankfulness to the animal kingdom, to the realm of the insects, and also all of the microbes that are in our body that help to digest the food, help with the circulation of the nutrients, and so forth. Anybody want to add anything to that? Okay, please. Yeah, there was the microphone. Yeah, I see it's right over here. Well, didn't you say? Oh, I see. It was, okay. It was Carolyn.
I think also to remember gratitude that we've manifested here, that we have eyes that can see, ears that can hear the wonderful Dharma, that we're healthy, we can walk.
Yeah.
That's the first thing when I wake up. I'm grateful I'm alive and here again.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have any thoughts to add to that? Is that Ken? Okay.
Bhante, just a quick question. The difference between gratitude and thankfulness, I was wondering if you could
I don't think that there's any real difference between them. I think that they're, you mean referring to the Pali words? Or the English words?
Just in general, yeah, maybe to the Pali words, yeah.
Yeah, the Pali words, I don't think that there's any real difference in their meaning. It's just that they're two words based upon different roots, but those two roots both mean to know. I'm sure that the commentary, this is the way commentators earn their living is by finding differences where probably no difference was originally intended, just out of curiosity. Okay, the difference here this is in regard to the negative qualities. With the meaning of ingratitude, it says, one does not know what has been done. And then for unthankfulness, it says, one does not know what has been done, having made it evident or clear. Maybe the sense, I think I get the sense that's intended here. So by ingratitude, it means that, this is actually works in English as well. By ingratitude, it means that one doesn't within one's own mind, one doesn't feel a sense of gratitude towards those who have conferred benefits on us. And then unthankfulness means that one doesn't know or recognize the benefits that have been done to oneself, and one doesn't sort of express one's gratitude externally. And so when we come to the positive qualities, so gratitude would be inwardly recognizing, acknowledging the benefits that have been conferred on us by others. And thankfulness is recognizing the benefits and then finding some way to express that recognition. By saying thank you, or I appreciate it, or returning the gift. For example, if somebody gives a gift on your birthday, then on their birthday, then you show your thankfulness by giving them a gift on their birthday.
If I may, can I add one more comment,
Please.
Bhante? I was thinking, probably this is more of a trend, more so, as time goes by, I think. People think that because they pay for an object, that there's no need to be grateful. I'm giving the money, therefore. And I'm starting to notice that even in education now, even in education, like colleges and universities, children are saying, or students are saying, we're paying so much money, therefore the teacher should be teaching us, versus the gratitude and thankfulness.
Yeah, though I think that there's a situation in many colleges and universities where teachers are not paid fully adequate salaries. So if there are high fees, tuition fees, other registration fees, whatever in colleges, universities, don't think that it's going to contributing towards exorbitant salaries for the teachers. Often they are overworked, not sufficiently paid, don't get sufficient benefits. In fact, what they have now in the many colleges and universities, what they call contract labor. So the teacher does not enter a tenure track, but they have to work teach individual classes, sometimes at several institutions, just to maintain a satisfactory standard of living. Is that Paul?
Yeah. Good morning.
Welcome.
Bhante, thank you. And thank you especially to the folks that helped put this together. I access the videos on a regular basis. And it really, what a blessing for everybody.
So Johnny, stand up and take a...
Yeah, we should give a little, send metta to these folks. But I was reflecting on the four basic requisites that monastics, bhikkhus and bhikkhunis are supposed to at least reflect on every day. And I actually started to integrate that into my own practice every day, and I've never talked about it with anybody, but this kind of brought that up. It's just very simple, food, clothing, shelter. Wow, I have a house, and I have medicine, and it's just, and then what am I using that for? Right? And I wonder, just as a monastic, if those feelings naturally arise, for example, for yourself when you do the reflection on the requisites. I know it's been helpful for me from a lay perspective, though, because I'm paying for these, as this gentleman implied. Of course, as a monastic, you're not. So it's interesting.
I have to confess, too often I take it for granted as well.
That's right. That's right.
No, the food, because now we've introduced a reflection on the food every day with a blessing to the people who make the food available. But too often, we're human, we have that fault. But there's one reflection that the Buddha, there's a discourse or a sutta also later, much later in the Anguttara Nikaya. But I think the first part also comes in the Book of Threes, so not that we don't have that far to go to come to the first three, where the Buddha mentions three reflections of a samana, that is, of a monastic. And one of them is parapatibaddha me jivikati. my life is dependent upon others.
That's right.
And that's not exclusive to a monastic, but for any human being.
And
their life is dependent on others, many others.
Yeah, and that's the point I wanted to bring out, because I thought, because it's a monastic practice, I think as lay people, just a suggestion to try to incorporate it at some level.
Yeah, I think it's a very good reflection, yeah.
Yeah, and then it leads to this, how we see, God, how interconnected we are at a very deep level.
Exactly. Yeah,
So, good. Thank you.
Yeah, in fact, there's a sutta, this occurs in the Iti-Vuttaka. It's, I think, the last chapter of the Iti-Vuttaka, where the Buddha says, he's addressing the monks, and he says that it's lay people who provide you with your daily requisites of robes, alms food, shelter, and medicines. And so you should provide the lay people with the gift of the Dhamma. And in this way, he says, Anyamanya Nisaya Ogang Taranti, I think it is, that relying upon one another, one crosses the flood.
If I could just add that monasticism, of course, looking at other forms of monasticism around the world, that's unique. This, we don't see it in Western, for example, Catholic monastics. They're very independent, so they make many of their own products and sell them. But this relationship between the lay community and the monastic, if it's clean, or relatively clean, wow, I see that taking us over the flood.
Yeah, you see,
that taking us over the flood, that collaboration.
I see,
between us both. But not me, but somebody will cross the flood. So thank you.
Okay, Ravi over here.
Thank you. Bhante, the word good person and bad person, isn't it better to say it's a good character and a good quality and a bad quality? Because just by being ungrateful or it doesn't make a person a bad person. There are so many good qualities they still have, But it becomes very strong. It's a bad person.
It's a strong statement, but the words are exactly, in one case, asapurisa. So the word that's common to both expressions is purisa, which is person.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
And then asat and sat, bad and good. But of course, nobody is inherently bad. It's just
exactly.
One who has bad characteristics or qualities is what we call a bad person.
Thank you, Bhante.
And I saw a hand back. Oh, Treya.
Hi, I just wanted to clarify, just to put a little plug for the Catholics. In the monastic communities, there are contemplative, they have different, okay, all right. Well, about the charisms then, you have active religious orders who really go out there in the community and do amazing things.
Actually, that is
I'm not
true.
even talking about your parish priest, And of course, then you have the contemplative orders, which are more cloistered, although they are known to take in people and do prayer requests and, all that sort of.
Oh, actually, that is a
stuff.
very important aspect about.
Because in the Catholic world, I mean, they really believe in that. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I'm not a great Catholic, but I still like to. No, that is true, right? The beekeeping and you're making a Benedictine, and there are actually some nuns upstate who make the best cheesecake in the world. But
I think that point that you make that.
But just because I think not everybody here may be Catholic, so sometimes people get, sometimes the wrong idea. I've had to sort of defend things among Protestants, I guess. So I guess I'm being an apologist, I guess, for the church here a little bit.
That the Catholic contemplative monastics.
Man, the Carmelites
are supposed to be. They even use the expression prayer factories. So that they're supposed to be praying for the welfare of the world. and sort of extending the power of their prayer out to the world as well as to people in need. So I would say even if one doesn't accept the belief in an all-powerful God, but I believe that there are these very intricate, subtle webs of conditionality occurring at a non-visible, non-tangible level. So I would say probably the prayers that are coming up from those contemplative communities are helping to prevent all-out nuclear war between the major powers through the last several decades. Okay, I think we should move on to the next sutta, unless anybody has anything urgent to add. Terry?
Bhante, I think good or bad is not really relevant, I think. I think if one shows some gratitude in normal day-to-day, the effect is immediate. You know, there's well-being amongst the people. I think, and I once asked, why be grateful? And I found that if one shows gratitude, the relationship amongst oneself is much better.
Yeah, I would say that showing gratitude, or let us say feeling gratitude within the mind and showing thankfulness externally will promote more harmonious, cordial relations with others. And even if the other person doesn't reciprocate and even treats you in a spiteful and malicious way, but as long as you continue to maintain that attitude of thankfulness and gratitude in your mind, you'll feel happy. In fact, there was a technique that was used, I read it years ago in one of the collections of sayings that come down from the Tibetan Buddhism. I think it was the sayings of the Kadampa masters, that it's the person who treats you spitefully, maliciously, callously, that is the true benefactor, because that is the person that helps one to develop patience, forgiveness, loving kindness. If everybody treats you kindly and confers benefits, manifest benefits on you, then there's no real challenge for developing those virtuous qualities. But it's under the difficult conditions that one is able to arouse the energy to develop those qualities.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, let us move on and see what lies ahead. I think this next sutta sort of naturally ties up with the theme of gratitude. Okay, so here the text says that there are two persons that cannot easily be repaid. So who are those two? One's mother and father. And I know that this is a teaching that many people, Westerners, find difficult to respond to, difficult to accept. So even if one should carry about one's mother on one shoulder and one's father on the other shoulder, and then while doing so should have a lifespan of 100 years, and if one should attend to them by anointing them with balms, by massaging, bathing, and rubbing their limbs, and then they even excrete their urine and feces on one's own body, one still would not have done enough for one's parents, nor would one have sufficiently repaid them. Okay, so that is sort of one side of the sutta. No, it's still continuing the same side. So it says, even if one were to establish one's parents as the supreme lords and rulers over this great earth, one still would not have done enough for one's parents, nor would one have repaid them. So what is the reason for this? Because parents are of great help to their children. They bring them up, or even before bringing them up, it's from the parents that we receive the material substance of our bodies. Then the parents bring us up. They feed us, and they show us the world, introduce us to the world. Yeah, and here maybe there's a significant difference in attitudes and feelings. Between Eastern culture and Western culture. I know in both Chinese culture and Indian, Sri Lankan culture, there's great emphasis on the virtue of filial piety. In Chinese, xiao, is it fourth tone? Xiao de, right? And also similar in Indian culture. So when I was in Sri Lanka, I saw that every day when children are being brought up, at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, they're supposed to bow down to their parents. And I noticed that the ties of affection between children and parents, very, very close. I mean, I don't know what goes on behind the closed doors, whether there are quarrels and fights of children. I want to go to the movies, all my friends are going to the movies, and you say I have to stay home and study. I want a bigger allowance, you're only giving me 10 rupees, all my friends are getting 20 rupees. Yeah, so I don't know what's going on behind the closed doors, but from what I could see, the children are very deferential and obedient and kind and polite towards the parents. And what do the children call? They call the mother in Sinhalese? Amma, isn't there something? There was something where they call the mother also Buddha. Amma Buddhu, is it? What is that? Oh, yeah, maybe that's the expression, that they refer to the parents as being the Buddha at the home, in the home. I'm not hearing.
The Buddha we know is masculine.
Yeah.
He was born a male,
yeah.
But they still sometimes refer to him. There's a term that is used as a mother, our mother, like our mother Buddha.
Maybe it's Buddha Amma?
Yeah, something like that, no? Yes.
Yeah, there is such an expression. I recall hearing that.
Because the mother seems more important than the father. I think that's why probably.
Yeah, because the mother is always very, very deeply concerned for the well-being of the children, whereas the father can be a little bit distant. Excuse me?
Buddhu Manyo or something like that, no? Buddhu Manyo.
Maybe that was it, Buddhu Manyo.
Yeah, something like that.
I remember an expression. Okay, so looking at the relationship between children and parents from a worldly perspective, the Buddha says that there's no way to satisfactorily repay the kindness of one's parents. But there is a way to express and to fulfill one's debt of gratitude to the parents. And that's what the Buddha brings up in the next passage. So he says, when one's parents lack faith, if one encourages, settles, and establishes them in faith, when one's parents are immoral, if one encourages, settles, and establishes them in the silas, in the virtuous behavior, if the parents are miserly, and then one encourages, settles, and establishes them in generosity, if when one's parents are dupanyo, when they're unwise or foolish, one encourages, settles, and establishes them in wisdom, in that case, one has done enough for one's parents, one has repaid them, and done more than enough for them. Okay, so here we have these 4 wholesome qualities. And so the proper way to fulfill one's debt of gratitude to the parents is by establishing them in faith, in the sila, or good behavior, generosity, and wisdom. And some of us have tried without much success, but one should always keep on trying. Anybody have any comments to add to this, or any reflections? Okay, Johnny, please take the microphone.
That does not, it does not limited to biological parent.
Here, I think certainly the Buddha is referring to the biological parents.
But because there's no technology in the old day for, say, a biological father is just a sperm donor who the kid never met.
Of course, the Buddha is speaking against the background of that time when there was no techniques of artificial insemination.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, if someone love and care you as if they like you are the own kid, you should feel like they are the parent.
Yeah, of course one could extend that sense of recognition of parenthood to others, to other elders in the family, or even to neighbors or friends of the family who treat one like like you are their own children. But here I think the Buddha is specifically referring to the biological parents, who are also considered he's using the idea of the average case, the ordinary case, where the biological parents are also the parents in the home, the ones who bring up the children, feed them, and show them the world. And I used to do this reflection in relation to my own parents, thinking of how from the time I was a little newborn infant, my father would go to work every day, working 7, 8 hours a day, having to take the train from Brooklyn into Manhattan and come back in the evening, working hard all day. And my mother would go shopping and cleaning, and then some years later, when I was in my early teenage years, and she went to work also, first part-time, then full-time. And why are they going to work to earn this money? Not so that they can splurge it on their own enjoyment of luxuries, but they were earning this money just to bring up myself and my sister, to ensure that we have a good education, provided with all the material needs of life. And we were so ungrateful, or at least I was. I can't speak for my sister. But later in life, I came to recognize how much they sacrificed for my sake. Okay, shall we move on to the next sutta? Okay, this is just one of these standard type of suttas in which we see the Buddha in a conversation with a Brahmin. And actually, this is part of a dialogue with a Brahmin. It seems to have been sort of taken out, excerpted, and put into a sutta of its own, but the fuller discussion occurs in Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Eights. Yeah, this sutta involves a number of word plays in which a Brahmin is accusing the Buddha of being of various faults. So he says that Master Gautama is a proponent of non-doing. Then he accuses the Buddha of being an annihilationist, of being a repeller, an abolitionist. So these were terms that were used in reference to some of the radical schools of thought that were in circulation during the time of the Buddha. And so the doctrine of non-doing was a doctrine that was held by some thinkers of this period, which proclaimed that even if a person goes around with a sharp knife, killing everybody on this side of the river Ganges, they don't commit any evil. And even if one goes on the other side of the river, giving gifts, practicing charity, helping the needy, one doesn't create any merit, any virtue. And so that was the doctrine of non-doing. And so this Brahmin accused the Buddha of being a proponent of non-doing. I guess because in the view of the Brahmins, what would have been meant by doing or activity would have been fulfilling the obligations that were laid down on the people from the different social classes, the different castes, according to the Brahminic system of social ethics. And perhaps also they considered that the task of the Kshatriyas, and the Buddha was from a Kshatriya family, the task of the Kshatriyas was to rule the country. And the Kshatriyas were also seen as those responsible for maintaining the Brahmins, providing the Brahmins with material support, so that the Brahmins could perform the rituals. The Brahmins were the ritual specialists. And since the Buddha had become a renunciant, one who had left the household life, by renouncing, he also relinquished the responsibilities, the obligations of the Kshatriyas, to support the Brahmins and to rule the country. And so this Brahmin accuses the Buddha of being a proponent of non-doing. And also because the Buddha, as well as the other ascetics who leave the household life, then are giving up their caste duties and teaching people that they should, or at least teaching their disciples, their monastic disciples, you should go into seclusion, live in the forest at the foot of a tree, in an empty hut, and devote yourselves to the practice of meditation. And the Brahmins, who were devoted to the ritualistic practices and the recitation of the Vedas, would have thought that these renunciants, these ascetics, are just parasites who are contributing nothing to society, and they just go around with their alms bowl in the morning and expect people to feed them, to provide them with medicines, to provide them with robes. And so they're just wastrels, they're just parasites living on the largesse of society, but not contributing anything to society, not doing anything for their own good, not doing anything for the good of others. In fact, this is also a criticism that's commonly raised against Buddhist monks, or sometimes raised against Buddhist monks here in the West by people who see us just without understanding what kind of activity we're engaged in. And so the Buddha says that there is a way in which one could rightly say of me. Let's go to our original Sutta, the twos. So the Buddha says, I assert a doctrine of deeds and a doctrine of non-doing. And then the Brahman says, how do you assert a doctrine of deeds? How do you assert a doctrine of non-doing? And so the Buddha says, I assert non-doing with regard to bodily, verbal, and mental misconduct. And I assert non-doing with regard to the various kinds of bad, unwholesome qualities. But he says, I also teach a doctrine of deeds, a doctrine of doing. So I assert doing with regard to good bodily conduct, good verbal conduct, good mental conduct, and I assert doing with regard to the numerous kinds of wholesome qualities. So it's in that way that I assert a doctrine of deeds or doing and a doctrine of non-doing. Okay, so if we want to fill that out, we could say that the Buddha teaches non-doing in the sense of not killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, not lying, slandering others, speaking harshly, engaging in idle chatter, and then not giving way to thoughts of greed, hatred, and delusion. But he asserts good deeds, good bodily, verbal, and mental conduct. Okay, when the Buddha says this, then I just want to again look at the Buddha's response in the eights. Yeah, it's the same response. Okay, when he says this, then the Brahmin reportedly continues by declaring that he's now gained faith or trust in the Buddha. And this is a standard passage which comes down whenever somebody gains confidence in the Buddha. They always express their confidence with the same formula. So this must have been a stock formula that had been composed by the compilers of the canon, probably maybe taking bits of statements of appreciation that came from other various auditors and put them together into one stock passage, so they don't have to repeat the same, so that they don't have to vary the expression of appreciation in many different ways. So to make it easier to transmit the text through a process of oral transmission, they use the stock formulation. So the Brahmin says, it's excellent, abhikantang bante bo Gotama, abhikantang bo Gotama. Master Gotama has made the Dhamma clear in many ways. And then 4 similes, as though he were turning upright what had been overthrown, revealing what was hidden, showing the way to one who is lost, or holding up a lamp in the darkness, so those with good eyesight can see forms. I now go for refuge to Master Gotama, to the Dhamma, and to the Sangha of bhikkhus, let Master Gotama consider me a lay follower who from today has gone for refuge for life. And is there anything in this particular formula here that strikes you as interesting and as curious, somewhat curious?
Why just the bhikkhus? Why just take refuge in the bhikkhu sangha? Why weren't the bhikkhunis mentioned as well?
Okay, that's an interesting point, but that's not what I had in mind. Maybe we'll come back to that. There's something else that struck me, even as I was reading this out loud. Drea, were you?
Is it that this is a Brahmin that's asking the question?
Yeah.
Right? Why he's becoming a lay follower and not a monk, maybe?
No, I think it's quite typical for many Brahmins became lay followers. There were other Brahmins, because the Brahmins were not necessarily renunciants. In fact, the great majority of Brahmins were householders. They married and they would bring up families. And in fact, it was like one of the Brahminic criticisms of the Buddha, as well as the criticism of the other samana sects, the sects of renunciants, that they have not fulfilled their human responsibility of begetting children. But there's something in the wording of this particular statement that strikes me as, it stands out a bit, it's somewhat striking. Chris? Considering that they've now become a follower of the Buddha. Yeah.
Bhante, I'm unclear about holding up a lamp in the darkness so those with good eyesight can see forms.
Yeah.
What does he mean by that?
Well, by this he's showing that, he's implying that in the past I was living in darkness, that I didn't understand things clearly and correctly. And that would be analogous to a person who has good eyesight, but they're in a dark room, and so in that room they can't see what is present in the room. And so if somebody comes into that room with a lamp, and the light of the lamp illuminates the room, then they could see, here are tables, here are chairs, there's a Buddha image, this is a desk. Then they can see the forms. So in the same way, previously he didn't know what is good, what is bad. Probably the Buddha would have given a longer discourse, like this is just an excerpt, where the Buddha would have then explained what is meant by bad quality, bad types of conduct that have been rejected, what are the types of good conduct that are now being cultivated. And so now the Brahman is saying, before I didn't know what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong. Now I understand this clearly. Okay, I'll take one more attempt, then I'll give my perspective on this.
Is it the fact that the Brahmin is saluting the Buddha using this phrase, Master Gautama?
Exactly.
Right.
And it occurred to me that the word Master Gautama might have been a bit misleading, but I couldn't come up with a better translation, rendering. Because the expression used here is, the direct address is Bo Gautama, or in the nominative, Bhavang Gautama. And Bo or Bhavang, it's an honorific, but it doesn't imply that the Buddha is my spiritual master. It's almost a little bit like the honorable Gautama or the respected Gautama. As opposed to Bhagava. Now, when a non-Brahmin is impressed by the Buddha's teaching and takes refuge, then they will say, excellent Bhagava, excellent Bhagava. The Bhagava, that's the Blessed One, has made the Dhamma clear in many ways. Then I now go for refuge to Bhagavantang, I go for refuge to the Blessed One, to the Dhamma, and to the Bhikkhu Sangha. Yeah, so, but we can see in the text, whenever it's a Brahmin who goes for refuge, they always continue to use the expression, the same expression that they would use to refer to the Buddha before they've gone for refuge. Like at the opening of, at the very opening of the sutta, when the Brahmin comes to the Buddha, he says, what does Master Gotama assert? What does he declare? So at this point, he's certainly not yet convinced about the Buddha's teaching. He's just raising a question to find out what is the Buddha's teaching. And so after he becomes convinced, he still continues to use that expression, Master Gotama. And we find that consistently. It's not only in the case of this Brahmin, but consistently the Brahmins will use Bo Gotama or Bhavan Gotama, whereas the non-Brahmins will, when they get convinced about the Buddha's teaching, then they'll shift from Samana Gotama or Bo Gotama, they'll shift to Bhagava. And then also what is significant, as Paul pointed out, is that it says, I go for refuge to the Bhikkhu Sangha. And he asks, why not the Bhikkhuni Sangha? First, it's possible that at the time this conversation took place, the Bhikkhu Sangha had not yet come into existence.
I whispered to him that maybe Ananda hadn't gotten around to it. Because it really was Ananda and
And Ananda what? Ananda what?
You can't, well, yes, he's the St. Francis of the, he really is.
I didn't hear Ananda what?
I was just joking. I said everybody loves Ananda. Yes. But yeah, I was just saying perhaps, Ananda, who knows when this was done? He may not have even been the Buddha's attendant at this point, or he may have been
and
younger.
also
We just don't know.
This is a stock passage, and it would be used probably even late in the Buddha's lifetime. I believe when the last disciple, Subhadda, became a disciple of the Buddha, this is when the Buddha was lying on his deathbed. He also would have said, I go for refuge to the Sangha of bhikkhus. Yeah, first, like one way, a modernistic way of interpreting this would be to understand that the expression bhikkhu sangha also implicitly includes the bhikkhuni sangha.
I really don't think you can do that, Bhante. I just think that's just the way things were back then.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying
that's
the modernistic way of interpretation is to say that the bhikkhuni sangha is implied by the bhikkhu sangha, but interpreting this probably against the ancient Indian background, it was a patriarchal society.
And that's that.
And
I said, and that's that. It's just, I think sometimes people need too much comfort. It's just, you have to be able to deal with things as they are, which is part of Buddhism, by the way, or any good religious or philosophic thing.
Yeah. So, like he would have seen the Buddha traveling around with his ordained disciples who would have been predominantly bhikkhus, monks, and maybe the bhikkhunis were over there in their convent or in their kutis, and maybe occasionally they would be present sort of on the margins of the assembly. And also as the Brahmins were themselves temperamentally disposed towards patriarchy, so it would have given the primary emphasis to the bhikkhus. Okay, any comments? And okay, let us take one more sutta. Okay, in this sutta, the householder Anathapindika approaches the Buddha, pays homage to him, and he says, this is a little bit of a scary sutta for some of us. He says, who in the world, Bhante, is worthy of offerings, and where is a gift to be given? And so then the Buddha replies, there are, householder, two in the world who are worthy of offerings, two kinds of people in the world who are worthy of offerings. One is the trainee, and the second is the one beyond training. So those are the two worthy of offerings, and the gift should be given to them. Okay, so the expressions that's used here is seka and aseka. And so the seka, the one in training, in the technical sense, means a disciple who has reached one of the stages of noble realization, who has entered the irreversible path to liberation, but has not yet reached the final goal of the path. So this would include the stream enterer, the once returner, the non-returner, and one on each of those three paths, the paths leading to the fruit of stream entry, once returning, non-returning, and also the one who has entered the path to arhatship, but not yet reached the fruit of the path. So it's said that those are the 7 kinds of trainees. We have the 3 lower fruits, those on the 3 paths to the lower fruits, and then the one on the path to the final fruit. And then the one beyond training, literally it means the one who's a non-trainer. This is the one who has reached the final goal of the training. So this is equivalent to the arahat. I'm sure the commentary will say something about this. Yeah, it also says that, the commentary says, here the virtuous, the person who's still technically a worldling, who's not yet reached any stage of realization, can still be seen as included, implicitly included by the stream enterer. So even though there are monastics who are not yet reached any stage of realization, any stage of higher attainment, but they could still be considered to be included because they're on the way of training themselves to enter upon the stage of the trainee. And so then the verse attached to the sutta says, in this world the trainee and the one beyond training are worthy of the gifts of those practicing charity, upright in body, speech, and mind. This is the field for those practicing charity, and what is given to them brings great fruit. Yeah, but there's another, you see, this is in terms of individual gifts, but there's another sutta which comes in the Majjhima Nikaya called the Discourse on the Analysis of Those Who Are Worthy of Gifts. And in that sutta it said that a gift to the Sangha as an organization is superior to the gift, any gift given to an individual. So when people give gifts, in order for the merit to be maximized, it's said that one should not think, I'm giving a gift to Bhikkhu Panya Jyoti, but I'm giving a gift to this particular monk as representing the Sangha. And in that way, the sort of value of the gift gets expanded so that it goes to the Sangha as a whole, not just to that particular individual. Okay, we could see if there are any questions now. Any comments? Okay. Yeah, please take the microphone.
Is the Pali word for charity dana in this sutta, or are you translating it? What is the Pali for that? I wonder if there's a differentiating between generosity.
Yeah, because I usually use giving for dana, so let us see. It could be chaga or yajja. Yeah, it uses the present participle form, yajja mananang. So the word yajja literally means to sacrifice. And so, based on this verb, we have the noun yanya. Or the Sanskrit would be yajna. And this was a Brahminic term that the Buddha took over. So for the Brahmins, yajna or yajna would be the sacrifice of even living beings. So the Brahmins in the Buddha's time would be sacrificing sheep and goats and bulls, as well as grain and other things, with the belief that by practicing sacrifice, they would be creating merits on behalf of their patrons, the kings and the princes, or for their own families. But the Buddha took this term, meaning sacrifice, and then gave it a new meaning, which was consonant with his own teaching. So that's why we translate it as charity. If we translate sacrifice, and then a newcomer to Buddhism reads that, they think, the Buddha is also practicing sacrifice or advocating sacrifice.
Very helpful.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, Tsering?
Bhante, how does what is the mechanics of this offerings to a noble ones greater than offering to another person?
Okay, it's said that there are two ways in which a gift becomes meritorious. One is based on the qualities of the donor, the person who's making the gift. The second is based on the qualities of the recipient. And so when you take these two together, you get 4 possible permutations. So it could be that the donor is a person without virtuous qualities, and the recipient is a person without virtuous qualities. So this would be maybe like when the thief is dividing up the loot that he's stolen with his fellow thieves. So he's giving gifts to another person. And so the gift that the thief is giving to another thief, both of them are without virtuous qualities. And so there's some, presumably there's some merit in the gift, because the robber chief could have taken all of the loot for himself, but out of a feeling of generosity and maybe gratitude towards his cohorts, he's giving some of the wealth that they stole and dividing up the loot that they stole from the bank, giving them a portion. Okay, so in that case, the merit is minimal. Okay, then it can be the case that the donor has good qualities, virtuous qualities, but the recipient doesn't. So some person, say a lay person, has very good qualities, kindness, compassion, trust and faith in the Dharma, wisdom, and they're supporting the temple, the monastery, and they know that they know that the monks are misbehaving, but still, out of their devotion to the Dharma, they want to support the monastery, and so they give those gifts to the monastery. So in that way, it's said that the gift becomes meritorious based on the qualities of the donor. Okay, it could be the third alternative, that the donor is a person without good qualities, but the recipients have good qualities. So in that case, the gift is purified or becomes meritorious based on the qualities of the recipient. And then the fourth, the maximum case, is where both the donor has good qualities, the recipient has good qualities. Then the gift becomes the most meritorious because both parties to this transaction have good qualities.
And so you could say that meritorious deeds or thoughts has more power, right, Bhante?
Say that again.
Meritorious deeds or meritorious actions has more power.
Meritorious deeds have more power.
Yes. Because you said, because of the virtuous qualities of the donor and the virtuous qualities of the recipient.
The meritorious deeds have power. Let's say the power of the merit depends on the qualities of both the donor and the recipient. Though probably there are cases where somebody, maybe with extremely compassionate intention, gives a gift to a, say, morally depraved person with the hope of transforming them through that gift. Maybe that gift becomes very powerful because of the compassionate intent. Okay, I think we're going to have to stop now for the lunch. And I just want to see what we're coming to next class. Yeah, the next sutta we're taking is very important sutta. And this sutta has a Chinese parallel which displays interesting contrast with the Pali version. So I'm also going to make, I think I did years ago when I was translating this, I also made a translation, or at least an outline of the Chinese version of the sutta. So before the next class, I'll send out the translation of the Chinese version as well. And those who read Chinese can find it as the Madhyama Agama Sutta number 21, Taisho Part 1, line 448C, or page 448C. Actually, I already have the notes also explain the difference between the two versions. Okay, and next week we won't be having the class because we have some other event on Saturday, and that will be, next Saturday we're having our Buddhist Global Relief. That will be our meeting on Saturday, so we won't have the class. But the following day, Sunday, will be the concert to feed the hungry. And so that will be held in New York City. There are postcards here about the concert. Will be held on Sunday, April 29th, 5 p.m. at St. Mark's Church in the Bowery. And so please, if you haven't already picked one up, please pick up a postcard, which is here. And there are some posters here about the concert. So if you're affiliated with any Buddhist center, Buddhist temple, or even if you know of a library, health food store in New York City, or any other similar place, yoga studio, where you think people might be interested in the concert, please take poster and put it up. Okay, so let us end with the sharing of the merits. So we share the merits from this class, share the merits with the Dharma-protecting deities, the Buddha, the Nagas, the dragon spirits, the Bhutas and fierce spirits, asking them all to protect the Dharma, to protect the world, to protect ourselves and others. Akasata Jabhumata Deva Nagam Hidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Sasanam. Akasata Jabhumata Deva Nagam Hidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Desanam. Akasata Jabhumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Mang Parang Etavatacham Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Deva Anumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavatacham Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Bhuta Anumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavatacham Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Satanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Bhavagupadaya Vici Hetato Etantare Satakayupapana Rupya Rupicha Asanya Sanino Dukkha Pamuchantu Pusantu Nibuting. Yeah, so we come back, let us say, for the Q&A session, comment section, let's say 12:20. Okay, so we'll end with the 3 half bows.